I don't usually take Ubers, but after a late night out with friends, it seemed like the safest option. I didn't want to deal with the risks of walking home or the sketchiness of public transit at 1 a.m. I ordered the ride, and within 5 minutes, a black sedan pulled up. The driver's name was Alex, and his profile looked normal. 4.8 stars, over 500 rides. The car matched the description in the app, so I didn't think twice about getting in. As soon as I shut the door, something felt off. Alex didn't greet me or even look in my direction. He just started driving. I figured he was one of those drivers who preferred silence, which was fine by me. I was tired and just wanted to get home. But then I noticed we weren't following the GPS route. The app showed a straight shot to my apartment, but Alex made a turn in the opposite direction. I cleared my throat and said, I think you missed the turn. The GPS says, I know where I'm going. He cut me off, his voice flat. That was my second red flag. My stomach started to knot, and I kept an eye on the app, watching as the little car icon veered farther and farther away from my destination. Seriously, can you just follow the route? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond. I stared at his face in the rearview mirror. His expression was blank, almost too calm, like he wasn't even registering my presence. I started thinking about all the horror stories I'd heard about rideshares and decided I needed to get out. I'm not feeling well, I said. Can you just let me out here? Still no response. My heart was pounding now. I texted my roommate to share my location and told her I was in an Uber that didn't feel right. She immediately called me, but before I could answer, Alex spoke for the first time since we left. Don't answer that, he said, his voice low but firm. Panic set in. I grabbed the door handle, but the child locks were on. At that point, we were in an industrial area, deserted warehouses and dark streets with no one around. I started yelling, demanding that he let me out, but he just kept driving. Finally, I remembered the emergency button in the Uber app. I hit it, and a message popped up saying the authorities had been notified. That seemed to get his attention because he slammed on the brakes and pulled over. It was a Saturday night, and I'd stayed at a friend's house a little later than planned. By the time I left, it was almost 2 a.m., and I didn't feel like walking to the train station in the cold. I ordered an Uber instead, trying to reassure myself that I'd get home quickly and safely. The car pulled up within minutes, a white sedan with tinted windows. The driver's name was Greg, and his profile seemed legit, 4.9 stars with hundreds of rides. He gave me a quick nod as I got in, but something about his energy felt off. He didn't say a word, not even a hello. At first, everything seemed normal. The GPS route matched the way I usually took home, and Greg drove steadily. I zoned out, scrolling on my phone until I noticed we were turning onto an unfamiliar road. Hey, I said, leaning forward slightly. This isn't the right way. The app says to go straight. Greg didn't respond. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and his eyes were locked on the road ahead. I spoke louder, trying to keep calm. Are you sure this is the right route? My place is in the other direction. Still nothing. I opened the app to check the route, and sure enough, we were heading way off course, into a more rural area where the streetlights were few and far between. My stomach tightened as I realized we were leaving the city entirely. Can you just stop here? I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'll get out and call another ride. Greg finally spoke, but his response didn't make sense. I just need to make a quick stop first, he said, his voice low and monotone. I stared at him, my pulse racing. What stop? That's not on the route. I didn't agree to this. He didn't answer. I started texting my roommate, sharing my live location and telling her something was wrong. She called me immediately, but when I reached for my phone, Greg's hand shot out and grabbed it from my lap. You don't need to do that, he said, his voice eerily calm. I panicked and tried to open the door, but of course the child locks were on. I shouted at him to pull over, but he just kept driving. Finally, I remembered the safety feature in the Uber app. I hit the emergency button, and within seconds, my phone started ringing with an alert from Uber. Greg glanced down at the sound, his jaw tightening. He pulled over abruptly on a dark, empty road and threw my phone back at me. Get out, he snapped. It was supposed to be a quick ride home after a long day. I was tired, and the thought of taking an Uber seemed easier than waiting for the bus. The driver's name was Carl, and his profile looked normal enough. Good rating, a standard silver sedan. When he pulled up, he rolled down the window and said, "Are you my name?" I nodded, and he gestured for me to get in. The first thing I noticed was that the interior of the car smelled strongly of air freshener, almost like he was trying to cover something up. I didn't think too much of it at first, though. The ride started normally. Carl made small talk, asking if I'd had a long day and where I was coming from. But then, without warning, he took an unexpected turn. "Sorry," he said, "this way avoids traffic." I glanced at the app. The route hadn't changed, and there wasn't any traffic. Are you sure? The app says to stay on Main Street," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. He didn't respond. The car started speeding up, and I noticed we were heading toward a more isolated area, mostly industrial buildings and empty lots. My stomach dropped. "Hey, can you stop here? I'll just walk the rest of the way," I said, trying to sound firm. Carl ignored me. I reached for the door handle, but it didn't budge. The locks were engaged. "Child locks," he said, without looking back. His tone was flat, like he'd done this before. Panic set in. I started texting my friend, sharing my live location and typing out, "Call the police, my Uber is sketchy." Before I could hit send, Carl snatched my phone from my hand. "Relax," he said, stuffing it into his jacket pocket. I was frozen for a second, then started screaming, hoping someone nearby might hear. He slammed on the brakes, making me jolt forward in my seat. "You're going to make this worse for yourself," he muttered, his voice tense now. That's when I noticed something even more terrifying. A second phone mounted on his dashboard, open to a text thread. The last message read, "Got another one. Be ready." I felt like I couldn't breathe. I had to think fast. "Look, I have cash in my bag," I said, trying to sound desperate. "Take it, just let me out." He didn't reply, but his grip on the steering wheel tightened. The car slowed down as we approached what looked like an abandoned warehouse. I knew this was my only chance. As soon as he reached for the gear shift, I unbuckled my seatbelt and launched myself over the center console, clawing for the unlock button. He grabbed at my arm, but I managed to hit the button and throw the door open. It was late, around 3 a.m., and I was exhausted after a long night out. I'd been visiting some friends at a bar on the outskirts of town and just wanted to get home. I ordered an Uber, and the car showed up within minutes, a black sedan with tinted windows. The driver's name was Marcus, and his profile had a 4.9-star rating with hundreds of rides. He looked normal enough when I got in, but I immediately felt off. Maybe it was because I was so tired, but something in the air felt strange. He didn't say anything when I got in, just nodded and started driving. I put in my destination, and the ride started normally, though it was clear Marcus wasn't using the GPS. The app was showing the usual route, but he was taking different turns. At first I thought maybe he just knew a faster way, but we were heading deeper into unfamiliar neighborhoods. I didn't say anything at first, just pulled out my phone to double-check the map. I noticed we were now driving far out of the way, into a part of the city I didn't even recognize. I think you missed the turn," I said, looking up from my phone. "The app says we should be heading down Oak Street." Marcus didn't respond. He kept driving, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. I began to feel uneasy, so I texted my roommate my live location just in case. The farther we went, the more it felt like the city was disappearing. The streets were getting emptier, the buildings more run down. It felt like we were heading into the middle of nowhere. "Hey," I said, my voice shaky now. "This isn't the right way. Can you stop? I'll get out here and call a different ride." Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he slowed down as we turned onto an unlit, narrow road. There was nothing around, just empty land and overgrown trees. "Please pull over," I said, my voice more desperate. That's when he looked over at me, his face blank and expressionless. "You should have gotten out at the last stop," he said, his voice flat. My heart raced. I scrambled for the door handle, but it was locked. I started panicking, hitting the window and begging him to stop. Instead, Marcus slammed on the gas, the car lurching forward. We were speeding now, and I could see a large, abandoned building up ahead. I knew I had to do something. I grabbed my phone, quickly sending a message to my roommate. "I'm in trouble, call the police." Then I pressed the emergency button on the Uber app. Marcus glanced at my phone as the emergency alert went through, and I saw his jaw tighten. Without warning, he pulled the car over again, this time in front of the creepy building I had seen earlier. He didn't say a word, just unlocked the door and gave me a long look. "Get out," he ordered. I didn't wait. I threw the door open and bolted. I ran until I saw headlights coming down the road. A car slowed and the driver saw me running and immediately stopped. They took me to the nearest gas station where I called the police. When the officers arrived at the location, they found the car still parked, but Marcus was gone. Later, Uber confirmed that the account used to book the ride was fake and traced back to a phone number with no real connection to any actual driver. I never saw that guy again, but it still haunts me. Please always trust your instincts when it comes to ride shares. You never know who's behind the wheel. It had been a rough day, and I was exhausted after a long shift at work. It was just after midnight when I ordered an Uber to take me home. The pickup point was just outside my office, and I was too tired to notice much of anything as I climbed into the car. The driver, whose name was Jason, didn't say much when I got in. Just a quick nod and a quiet, "How's it going?" His profile looked normal, and he had decent ratings, so I didn't think twice. We drove off, and at first, everything seemed fine. He asked me how my night had been, and I gave him a short response. The car was quiet after that, with only the soft hum of the engine filling the space. But then, I noticed something strange. Jason kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, and it wasn't the casual glance you might expect from a driver. It felt more like he was studying me. His eyes lingered just a bit too long, and it made me uncomfortable. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid, but the unease was growing. We were about 10 minutes into the ride when I noticed something even stranger. The streets outside the window were starting to look unfamiliar. I pulled up the app on my phone, and the route was completely different from the one I had selected. Jason?" I said, trying to sound casual. "I think you missed a turn. This isn't the way to my neighborhood." He didn't respond, but I could see his hands tightening on the steering wheel. My gut instinct was screaming that something was wrong, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe he had a shortcut in mind, or maybe there was some construction I didn't know about. But we kept driving, further and further away from my neighborhood. "Hey, I think you're lost," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Jason turned to me then, his face expressionless. "You sure about that?" "Yeah," I replied. "I think you're heading the wrong way." His eyes flicked back to the road, and I noticed his hands shaking slightly. The car sped up, and I could see the streetlights getting dimmer, the city skyline fading behind us. I started to panic. "Stop the car," I demanded. "Pull over right now." He didn't respond. The car was moving faster now, and the road was becoming more desolate. I grabbed for my phone, but it wasn't there. My stomach dropped. I had left it on the passenger seat when I got in, and it was now nowhere to be found. That's when it hit me. He had taken my phone. "Where's my phone?" I shouted. "Give it back!" Jason kept his eyes forward, but now he was muttering under his breath. It was barely audible, but I could make out the words. "We've gone too far to turn back now." I didn't know what he meant by that, but I knew I had to get out. As the car sped down an empty stretch of road, I yanked on the door handle. Thankfully, it wasn't locked. I bolted out of the car as soon as the door opened, running as fast as I could. Behind me, I heard Jason yelling, but I didn't stop to look back. I ran for what felt like forever, until I finally saw headlights in the distance and flagged down a passing vehicle. The driver, an older man, took me to a nearby gas station where I used their phone to call the police. When they arrived, they found Jason's car parked at the edge of an abandoned lot. But when they searched the area, he was nowhere to be found. They later discovered that Jason had been using a fake account, and his real name was linked to several reports of similar incidents where passengers had mysteriously disappeared during rides. I don't know what his plan was or what would have happened if I hadn't escaped, but I'm just thankful I trusted my instincts. Always pay attention to your surroundings and never ignore that gut feeling, no matter how small it seems. It was around 2 a.m. when I finally called an Uber after a night out. I'd been hanging out with friends at a club on the edge of town, and after a few too many drinks, I was ready to head home. I requested the ride and saw that a driver named Leo was on his way to pick me up. When I got into the car, he greeted me with a warm smile, though something about his smile felt a little forced. He was in his mid-30s maybe, and his car, an older model Toyota, looked clean, but there was something off about it. The windows were tinted so dark I couldn't even see his face clearly from the back seat. I buckled in and he started driving. We didn't talk much at first, but I didn't mind. I was exhausted, and all I wanted was to get home as quickly as possible. The first few minutes of the ride were fine, But as we started driving, I noticed we were taking a different route than usual. At first, I thought maybe it was just a quicker way, but the road felt quieter, almost too quiet. I glanced out the window, noticing that the usual city lights were starting to disappear, replaced by dim street lamps and empty streets. Leo? I asked, trying to sound casual. Are you sure this is the quickest route? I live off street name, and this isn't how I usually go. He didn't answer at first. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, and the car sped up. Leo? I repeated, this time more insistent. Finally, he glanced at me in the rearview mirror. His expression was unreadable. Don't worry, he said almost soothingly. This will be quicker, but I didn't believe him. I pulled up the map on my phone and saw that we were heading out of town, toward a part of the city I'd never even been to before. My heart started racing. Can you stop the car? I asked, now starting to panic. I'll just get out here. He didn't respond. Instead, he turned onto a long, deserted road, the kind of road that felt like it led nowhere. The silence in the car was suffocating, and I could feel my anxiety building. I grabbed my phone to text my friend my location, but when I unlocked it, I saw the screen was black. The phone had completely shut off, even though it was fully charged earlier. I pressed the power button over and over, but nothing happened. Leo, I said, my voice trembling, I need to get out of here. I don't know where we're going, and this isn't funny. He didn't reply. Instead, he glanced back at me, his eyes cold and unblinking. I had no choice now. I had to escape. My seatbelt was still on, but I unlatched it quickly, trying to be as discreet as possible. As soon as the car slowed at a stop sign, I yanked open the door and bolted out, not caring about how dangerous it might be. I ran for what felt like forever, not daring to look back. After a few minutes, I stumbled across a small convenience store, and the man behind the counter called the police for me. When the officers arrived and searched the area, they found Leo's car parked at the end of the road, but he was gone. A few weeks later, I found out that Leo was using a fake name. His real name had been flagged for suspicious activity on rideshare platforms, and he had a history of picking up passengers late at night and taking them on detours to isolated areas. I still don't know what he was planning to do, but I'm just glad I was able to get away. If you ever feel uncomfortable in a ride, trust your instincts. You never know who's behind the wheel. Thanks for tuning in. See you in the next video.